welcome. Thank you for coming and joining our hike and presentation about the historic Bolsa Chica Gun Club. My name is Chris Epting. I'm thrilled that you're here. We're going to walk across the bridge and then make our way down the trail out to the site. When you walk across the bridge, make a mental note about that bridge, because where you're standing in the middle there factors into the story, okay? So keep that in mind. That's our first sort of stopping point. As we walk up here, look, if you look off to the side, things like that pipe over there, that's a remnant probably of the bunkers they put in during World War II, which we'll talk about. But when you see things like that, nothing is there by accident. When you see pipes and air outlets, it's either connected to the gun club or the bunkers, as we'll talk about. There was a real network of things going on up here. Okay, it was a nice walk coming out here. Hopefully you noticed little bits and pieces of pipe along the way. So if you don't know, these palm trees here that look woefully out of place are woefully out of place. That would have lined the driveway, as we'll walk back and see in a minute, of the Bolsa Chica Gun Club. Now the gun club goes back to 1899. And again, I'm not going to tell the whole story here, I want to tell it inside, but generally speaking, there was a group of very wealthy industrialists who had a gun club. Gun clubs, if you don't know, were very popular back. There were 38 of them, I think, in Orange County total back in the 1800s. Early 1900s, where people with money would go sort of, you know, they would hunt duck and quail and geese and whatnot. Very men's club kind of thing. So when this one particular club in Irvine, when they lost their lease on it, they gathered up here and they purchased about 1,500 acres here for $25,000. They created a company called the Bolsa Chica Land Company, and they built their own gun club. These were people, these were champions of industry. It was names like Slauson, Torrance, Huntington, I mean, very big names from the time, people who were big in finance and agriculture. And so they built, I'll show you a photo inside of a typical gun club. This was not that. This was a redwood and cedar spectacular. This was, I mean, it sat just beyond those palm trees. It opened in 1899. But the problem was these guys wanted freshwater fowl, essentially, to shoot. This was an estuary here. You know what an estuary is? It's a mixture of salt and freshwater. They wanted to create an exclusive freshwater environment. So they hired a guy named Tom Talbert, who you may know, very well-known businessman, politician in Orange County. They hired him to build a dam that would keep the seawater out, keep the fresh water in, which would pool out here from rain and other sources. There was a thing called the Freeman Creek, which used to run down here. And so the dam that Talbert built, essentially, is right there. That's what you're looking at. That piece of, that dam, essentially, is the Talbert Dam. I was saying to Chuck, I wish there was a sign there that told that story. He builds that dam in 1899, the year the gun club opens, and it allows them to create pools and all these freshwater lakes, you know, for hundreds of acres out there. But within about 6 months, silt begins developing here. It becomes a big problem. They call him back and they say, look, you got to help us out. The bridge we walked over, that notch that Warner covers there, that's what Talbert built to allow some flow to get the silt out. So I love when I walk here, you think about, you know, you think these things are just sort of accidental, but that's actually a remnant of what Talbert cleared for the silt to clear, and this is the Talbert Dam right here. And there was a film shot here in 1930. I'm going to show it to you inside as a mental note. You're going to see an automobile drive up from Coast Highway, and this was the road actually leading up. The dam became the actual roadway into the gun club. And so when the gun club opened, you know, originally to get from LA to here, it would take 2 to 3 days, okay? But then, you know, and it would involve boats and stagecoach, all these sorts of travel. But there was a guy here named Henry Huntington who was part of the Bolsa Chica Gun Club. And what's amazing to me is that had he not come here to be part of this consortium of powerful men, he never would have heard of this thing called Pacific City. After a couple of years, he heard about this collective down there called Pacific City, and he purchased it. He had just gotten out of he was a railroad magnate with the Southern Pacific. He sold his shares in that for this blows my mind, $50 million in 1899. If you can imagine what that would be worth today. he sold out and he created a thing called the Pacific Electric Railway, which was the red car line, you know, and he began running trains down here. And so, you know, Huntington Beach was essentially just kind of like a sponsored community. It was Huntington's community that he, and I was saying to Chuck, by the way, you've given tours here for 12 years, one of the great volunteers at the center. And he knows a lot about this area. Hopefully he'll chime in with some stuff. But, you know, what's amazing is a lot of the research I've done, I always wanted to place Henry Huntington in Huntington Beach. I figured there's got to be a photo, a notation, something. I've been in the Huntington Library countless times. I'm a research hound. To me, it's like detective work. I think you can say safely, Henry Huntington never set foot in Huntington Beach proper. I think this is as far as he got. There is zero record of him, because after he ran the trains down there, had he been there, there would have been a record of it. There just would have been. I've gone through his daily planners from that period. There is no record of him ever visiting the city that bears his name, which I find kind of interesting, you know. This is as far as he would have gotten. So as far as the gun club goes, they would bring down the finest chefs from Los Angeles. They had people who helped, you know, they had fields here to grow seed to attract birds. This was like a working ranch almost. It really was a very elaborate place. And again, the lodge itself was beautiful. And so they would hunt 2 days a week, and for non-hunting seasons, they created a series of lakes they stocked with black bass. And they say the fishing, you could catch your limit in like an hour. They said it was spectacular fishing here. I want to walk over and show you the remnants of what's there today. I was allowed back there once. And it's pretty amazing. If you go beyond the fence, there's a lot of crap back there, you know? It's a lot of remnants. Some may be part of the gun club. People sort of, you know, would squat back there after it was shut down. We'll talk about inside. But there are a lot of things that do feel tied to the gun club. Alpha Beta supermarkets, you know about, Chuck, they would use the fields to raise cattle in the 1930s. You know, right here, the field we walked past. So it really was a very different place. Anyhow, why don't we walk over and take a look at where the gun club actually was. Then we'll head back and I'll unpack this story more with the photos and everything. Cool? Hey, as we walk back, pay attention here. When you see this concrete that's modeled, this is part of the gun club. This is gun club remnant. It's part of the driveway. And in fact, I think there's some more down there, but if you follow it up, this are pieces they never got rid of. Yeah. The driveway wrapped itself around into the middle of those trees, and then the gun club sat just beyond the row of trees, literally about 30 or 40 feet past that line of trees. So again, you see the more walkway here. This was all attached to the gun club, the sidewalk here. This was most likely a water tank or sewage treatment or something like that. But clearly, I'll show you an aerial shot inside where you can see its proximity. But if you stand here, this is an amazing viewpoint, I think, of just how it is now. I love the fact the birds have kind of reclaimed it. Yeah. For all the carnage that would have happened here. With all the people gone now, these trees, when the herons are nesting here, are unbelievable in nesting season. The babies, I mean, the sounds you hear here on certain days, all those trees are so full. Are there any birders here or people that... This is one of the...
Took pictures Monday in one of the palm trees on that side. There's a big nest that has tipped over because a frond broke, and there are 3 big eggs visible from the trail.
Really?
They're right there.
Yeah, it's a remarkable spot. But if you just pause for a second and think, we were saying the conversations and decisions that were made right in there. You know, the King of Sweden, King Gustav, was in there. You know, one of Pope Pius to be was in there. There's talk that George Patton was in there, but all the shakers and movers of Southern California, this was their getaway. There was nothing, when you see the image of the gun club, there was nothing like this in Southern California. So I always kind of stop right here and just think about, you know, what happened in there that affected your lives afterwards. You know, I think Henry Huntington being there is obviously the biggest thing, because this is where he heard about Pacific City. This is where that nexus all came together right here. And I think, you know, I read stories about the staff that worked here and the people that their lives were built around. You know, they had duck blinds all over, obviously. You could order gourmet lunches delivered to the duck blind as you shot, you know. These men could have whatever they wanted. The finest wine and champagne was brought here from Los Angeles. I mean, it really was, You know, and again, there was nothing around for miles, so they really had this area unto themselves when they were here. And in the off season, it was sort of a social hall. When there was no shooting going on during the off season, they would come here and cater fine dinners and have private parties and things. There was a well-known piano player. Frederick March, the famous actor, was in the film I'm going to show you, 1930. He ended up going into Huntington Beach and loved it so much, there was a place at the corner of Beach and PCH called Dwight's. If you know Dwight's along the beach, his father, the original Dwight's, had a sort of a tavern and restaurant there, and Frederick March would drive down just to drink at the bar there for years afterwards. So this place generated a lot of celebrities came here over the years, and we'll talk about what happened to it and why it was taken over in World War II. But what's interesting?
How secluded would it be here? I mean, what would be the closest?
Well, Westminster. I mean,
Yeah, you know, a friend of mine, Lon Peak, family owned the Peak Family Mortuaries, and they owned one of the original houses in Huntington Beach. And they and the Bashards, there were like 5 houses, and there were dirt roads between them.
Yeah.
I mean, Garden Grove Boulevard was the main street, and anything off of that coming this way was dirt.
Right. You know, they were isolated out here, and you know, the people that hurt were the local farmers, because what happened was when these guys came in and sealed, when Talbert built that dam, all of a sudden now it killed, you know, struggling farmers had a very hard time with that. You know, and it created a kind of ecological chaos, because now you had no more salt water coming in regularly, but the salt was still left there. So whenever it rained, that salt, it became very saline environment, right? And things just, you're not supposed to mess with nature on that level. The farmers were so frustrated, they petitioned Teddy Roosevelt in 1904, I think, to say to him, look, we need help out here. Can you please help us? We need the water opened up again. But Roosevelt, who I'm a big fan of and actually wrote a book about, and we'll be giving a talk about in March, I think, on a book I wrote at the same center we're at today. He passed it off to somebody, and the money and power won. So the farmers really lost here. There was the Freeman Creek that came down that got cut off. They would take boats down there to get to the ocean. The gun club took that over. So these guys came in and really, you know, it was really an occupation, but you couldn't fight with that kind of money and power at the turn of the century, you know.
Did that save it from the oil?
Well, we'll talk more inside.
Okay.
When they needed, I will tell you though, they needed water up here, and they would drill water wells. And you know what happened? They would get this water that was strangely, it had a natural gas content.
Okay.
And so they would separate the water from natural gas and use the natural gas to power, you know, to cook on and, you know, to power the place. People in Huntington Beach did the same thing. And nobody had ever put together of what it meant, of why that water had so much natural gas in it. And then someone from Standard Oil hears about it and is like, wait a minute, where is Huntington Beach?
Talbert tells the story that when they drilled those boreholes, that, you know, everything was horseback up here, and so the cowboys were riding through there from the riding stable here, and one of them flipped his cigar down into one of those holes and it caught fire, and that's how they discovered that.
They would bottle the water and shake it up and light the water when you release the cap. It was like a parlor trick. And again, nobody put together, well, Standard Oil did. They knew that when your water is that kind of natural gas content, it's usually a pretty good indicator that there's oil. So we'll talk a bit more about the oil inside. They did drill up here a lot. Initially though, the guys up here didn't want it because they didn't need the money at that point. So we'll talk about it more. But hey, if you look back at those wood posts back there, those were the horse stables. And you've got this metal piece here. I mean, again, if you go back there, there's a lot more, but where the horse stables were, that's a very interesting remnant. And you could bring your bird dogs up if you wanted to. They had a stable for the dogs. And if you didn't have a dog, they would hire local kids to go out and get the birds once you shot it. Everybody, we made it, we came back. I want to show you now again with some of those things in mind. Personally, by the way, I think that bridge, that last bridge we walk over, I think should be called the Talbot Bridge, since he cut that open to allow the silt to come out. I don't know why they wouldn't give that bridge a name of some sort. But anyhow, what this is an artist rendering of the gun club as it looked in its heyday, which I think is just kind of a nice way to start to think about what used to be up there. Of course, one of those palm trees is what would have been still up there now. A little bit of background. I talked a little bit outside about what I do. These are some of my, I mentioned these books. I did a book called James Dean Died Here, The Locations of America's Pop Culture Landmarks. I still to this day have people call me that go looking for that sign. In reality, it says Bakersfield and Fresno. This is an artist's idea of how to, which I thought, it's almost too clever because it looks too real. And this was a book I did in 2001 or so that it became like NPR's book of the summer. So every week I'd go on NPR and I would kind of talk about road trips and places to visit. And I did a whole series of these books. The sequel was called Marilyn Monroe Died Here. It was spelled D-Y-E-D, and it referred to a place where she became a blonde for the first time. But each of these books has hundreds of places where stuff happened that you don't know about, like that subway grating where Marilyn posed. This is sort of a big passion of mine. I did a book called Roadside Baseball. I'm a big baseball fan, and similarly, I did a book on Teddy Roosevelt in California. I'm going to be here in March in this space doing this lecture, which you might want to come to. It's all about, it's an incredible story. His very first trip to California. Now, they say that he visited the gun club. If you look in all the literature, it mentions Teddy Roosevelt. That was interesting to me. The only time it could have happened would have been on this trip. His very first trip to California, he came in 1903. It was a 9-week road trip away from the White House. And I have done dogged research on his 2 days in Los Angeles. I searched for the pocket of time that would have allowed him to come down here. It doesn't exist, sadly. So he was not here. However, from here he goes up north, he meets John Muir, and the focal point of this book is a 3-day camping trip with John Muir that did take place that resulted in the national park system being born. They went to the backcountry, and I'll tell that story in March. It's a crazy story about what these two men did. Two very polar opposite people. You know, the boisterous, outspoken Roosevelt and the very quiet, modest Muir. Somehow these two guys in the woods forged a friendship that resulted in, you know, in the park system. I did a book on Huntington Beach. I've done a lot of books, but I'm showing a couple here. Huntington Beach Then and Now. I love Then and Now photography, where you can, I'll take an old photo and then line up that exact same photo. That to me is always a very interesting way of learning about time. Sorry about getting in your way.
That's all right.
I did a book on Huntington Beach. This one, which you may have seen, Vanishing Orange County, and then Chronicles of Huntington Beach. I like writing about, I write about a lot of different national things, but I think as a researcher and historian, you've got to pay homage to where you live too. And Huntington Beach, when I first moved here in 1999 with my family, I went to the Barnes & Noble at Bellaterra, and I wanted to learn about, I didn't know a lot about the city. I had taken a job from Los Angeles in Newport, but didn't want to go all the way down. So we landed here, and I wanted to learn. I knew nothing about Huntington Beach. And I go to the Barnes & Noble, and upstairs at the information counter, and I asked for the books on Huntington Beach. And she says, well, there are none. And I said, you're kidding me. I said, the city's going to be 100 years old, a couple 100,000 people. You would think there'd be nothing. So I decided then to write that book, if nothing else for myself, to force me to go learn about the city. A lot of the books I write typically are books I go looking for, and if they don't exist, I write them, so I have one. And then if anybody else wants one, they're free to get one as well. But anyhow, I mentioned other gun clubs in Orange County. This was the Lomita Gun Club, okay? To give you an idea of where this was, if you know Harborview, the school right on, what's it on, Saybrook? Near Algonquin there. This sat pretty much where the school is today, okay? Now if you look at that gun club, it's like almost like a cottage, you know? It was essentially a place where guys could meet up before going off and shooting. There were no real accoutrements, there was no place to sleep, there was certainly no restaurant or anything like that. But this is very typical of gun clubs in Orange County, okay? Henry Huntington, as I talked about, again, had he not come down here to shoot at the gun club, he probably wouldn't have heard about this thing called Pacific City that in 1903 he took over, and then eventually ran his red car down here and named it after himself. So that's what he looks like. Has anybody been to the Huntington Library and Gardens? You ever go back to where he's laid to rest? If you walk all the way in the back, it looks like it looks like the Jefferson Memorial in Washington. The reason is, it is the Jefferson Memorial. The guy who designed that did this as a small scale, okay, for Huntington. Then he took that idea and presented it in Washington, and it's a replica. The Jefferson Memorial is just a larger version of his tomb. You see back there. This is the Bolsa Chica Gun Club, one shot of it. So again, as you can see, it's a pretty major structure. A couple of stories in certain parts of it. There's almost no photographic evidence of this place existing. You know, it predates, you know, not cameras, certainly photography, but you have to understand, these men were up there and they wanted privacy. There was no press allowed up there. The point was that they didn't want this documented. This was an old school cedar and redwood men's club. Okay, so the idea wasn't to really capture to document it, it was to keep it private, but there are certain shots of it. And here you kind of see, it's easy to imagine guys sort of, you know, on the, you know, that would have been sitting out here with their scotches kind of solving the problems of the world, or at least Southern California. Now this kind of gives you an idea. We're right here. Okay, we walked over the bridge right there. Just to kind of situate where we were, we walked, we came up here, this trail here. We sat right around here and then walked in here to see where the gun club would have been. These are those palm trees that are there. That's the remnant sidewalk area up there. But this gives you an idea of the land. Anybody hike this trail up here, the Brightwater Trail? Anybody find it weird that you can look into people's lives like that? I mean, for those homes, as expensive as they are, the thought that your entire, because really, you can't look in someone's front of the house. It's the back of the house where you see people's lives, where you see a pool. They want you. I think it's creepy. You know, if you see kids back there or animals, whatever, I think it's very strange. The dynamic to me, I don't feel comfortable walking back there, because you don't want to make, if you're on a walk or whatever, walking your dog, to make eye contact is weird, you know what I mean? But anyhow, that's, I know. Here's another shot of the gun club, again from a different angle. And again, you can kind of see how elaborate it was. You got these structures that existed for a short period of time. And it really is, again, a very sort of classic, if you think about that, somebody mentioned like the national park structures or the hotels up at Yosemite. It had a little bit of that flavor, that early Southern California, you know, very rustic, very rugged look. This is the inside of the Parlor, okay? Super rare photo. To my knowledge, the only known interior shot of what was there. But you look at the chandelier, and this is a very proper kind of drawing room. They had a billiards table. They had a piano. They would bring in well-known piano players to sort of serenade these guys. But again, I think this image, you know, kind of classic antlers up on the wall, this image really gives you an idea of how this was a well-oiled, well-heeled men's club.
Where do you find these photos?
This was from this image in particular, I believe, was an archive that was taken not early in the day. This is mid-1920s. This was in an archive that I think Orange Coast magazine discovered in the early 1990s. I wrote a column for them for years, so when I would be there, I would go through their archives just looking for anything, and these popped up.
USC has a colossal archive.
USC's good digital archive.
Just a side note.
And all over back east as well. I mean, there are monuments to this guy on the East Coast, Northeast Coast. He was very prominent, but again, there were a lot of prominent men that came here, again, shoot 2 days a week. Women and children, not really allowed in the off season. They could come down, kids couldn't talk, you know, but you could book rooms here. You know, this was a place that would come stay for a number of days. And they would, that bridge we went over that Talbert cut the channel there were men that would take their boats from Long Beach and actually take their boats right up and check in where the dam is down there. So membership initially, I believe in 1899, was $1,000 a year, and went up sequentially. By the 20s, it was up in the 20,000s. It was expensive for the time. Now this photo to me is fascinating. This to me is actually the most telling image of the whole place, because it gives you an idea of all the support structures. Okay, this is where we were sitting, okay? This is before all the other palms have been planted. But if you look at the other structure, here's the dam, but look at, there were servants' quarters here. You know, they would raise, again, they had refrigerated areas to keep all the perishables. There was a whole network of structures up here. It was really very elaborate. Full-time staff that lived here year-round, you know, and structures back here. You had riding stables off over here, and the ponds and lakes were all out here. Dozens of them, you know, at times hundreds of them. But again, what they did to the environment by sealing this off, it's still, I mean, to this day, Chuck, right, they're still sort of, you know, paying the price for what happened there.
And up there on the right, that's the remains of Freeman Creek.
Here. Yeah. Freeman Creek, which was a tributary of the Santa Ana River, if I'm not mistaken. And this really was a big part of the story. Now, I've heard tell that you can find a remaining trickle of the Freeman Creek if you go back up in there. Do you know about this? Supposedly, there's one little spot off trail where you can find a little remnant, which I would love to do, and probably will wander at some point off hours and go find something there. But again, this photo to me is really telling and really interesting and gives you an idea of just how developed this was.
What's the
Oh, sorry.
that?
I'll go back. That photo is, I would place this, I mean, again, it's not right after it opened, it's once they've developed it. I think this is mid-1920s to late 1920s. Now, again, we were talking about the oil there, when they have this water that has all this natural gas, they're separating the natural gas out, using it to power the place. In 1920, when Standard Oil comes in and they do start punching holes and finding oil, they go to the gun club and they want the property. The gun club members at that point weren't that interested. They leased off little parcels, 10 acres here, 10 acres there. They didn't need the money at that point. They were more concerned about protecting the integrity of their getaway, because this is still the middle of nowhere, okay? What happens though, what happens in 1929? Market crashes. So then they think, wait a minute, they go back to the oil companies at that point looking to sell more off. Now money is, you know, of course the values have shifted and they end up selling a lot more off post 1929. But originally they weren't that interested. Eventually you had lots of wells being dug here while the gun club was still in business. But so the photo I'm talking about, 1927, you know who these two guys are? It's Babe Ruth and who's this? Lou Gehrig. So in the off season in the 1920s, typically, they would do what were called barnstorming tours. And in the off season, they would actually, remember, Major League Baseball was not west of the Mississippi yet. So ball players, to make some extra money and kind of get away from, honestly, Babe Ruth's case, they didn't get away from his wife and kids, they would travel west, and they were sort of like, almost like Johnny Appleseeds of baseball. They would play baseball in small towns and get people excited about Major League Baseball. They were real ambassadors of the game. And so Babe Ruth would front a team called the Bustin' Babes. Lou Gehrig had the Larapins, and they would tour together. It was almost like a sideshow act. Did huge business around Southern California. Ruth did this all the time. This was Lou Gehrig's only trip to California. It's 1927. I don't know if you're baseball fans. It's a very important year in baseball. The Yankees, their team was nicknamed Murderers Row. Arguably the most powerful, legendary team in baseball history. They win the World Series, and Ruth decides to drag Lou Gehrig out in 1927 to do a barn. Ruth did these tours every year. He said, Lou, we're going to go out here, make a lot of money. Ruth made a lot of money. He was paid that year $100,000, a little more than the president. But most ball players were not. Most ball players back then ran businesses in the off season. You know, baseball was not what it is today. Gil Hodges in Brooklyn had a bowling alley. I mean, everybody had little things they would do. For Ruth, though, he would travel the country and would be the toast of the town whenever he arrived. So the picture I referenced outside, this is the picture that everyone says, wow, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig at the Bolsa Chica Gun Club, which blew me away to think about it. Babe Ruth is wearing his Yankee jacket, which I think is amazing. Lou Gehrig is as well. So here's his photo, right? I always assumed it was taken here, right? Why wouldn't you believe the 200 frickin' sources that cite it? But there was something about it. Again, I've written a lot about baseball. You can see there's sort of catches of the day. I've written a lot about Babe Ruth. I'm a Babe Ruth freak. When I was a kid, he was laid to rest about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And every August 16th, the anniversary of his death, I would take my Yankee hat, I'd march up to, my mom would take me to their cemetery, I'd march up the hill, I'd leave my hat at his grave, we'd go buy another Yankee hat, I'd play ball in it all year, and the next year, complete the cycle. I did this for about 7 years. I'd go leave my hat up. I played a lot of baseball as a kid, and I just loved reading about Babe Ruth. And Babe Ruth saved baseball in a lot of ways. 1919, when the series was fixed by gamblers, baseball needed a hero, and that's where Babe Ruth came into play. But anyway, there are some other images from that day. Here's Ruth and Gehrig sitting on the hood of that same car, right? And then one final image of a group of these guys. So this kind of concerned me, right? I couldn't find any evidence of this. And the tree line is kind of weird too, right, Chuck? I mean, this is kind of tough to place here. What I did learn about was the identity of this guy. This guy's name is Glen Thomas. If you're ever in Long Beach in 405, Glen Thomas, the car dealership, right? So I go there into Long Beach and I meet he's just died a few years before, which is unfortunate. But this picture hangs in the wall of the car dealership. And I meet his granddaughter, right? And she tells me this whole story about he was a very shrewd guy. When celebrities came through town, he would kind of hook them up. He would take them out shooting. He would sell them a car, or in Ruth's case, give them a car. And it was a good way to say, hey, Babe Ruth shops at Glen Thomas Ford, you know? He was a very smart guy. So she didn't know where this picture was taken. So I started doing research into him. What I learned that he was a member of a place called the Farmers Gun Club, which was, if you know where the Los Al racetrack is, on that site. And that's where these photos were taken. That's where he brought Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And if you go there, you can actually, these trees aren't there, but there are trees like this there. You know what I mean? And so I did more research. So if you ever see these photos, nevertheless, Babe Ruth was 15 minutes from here, 20 minutes from here. It's still, you know, fantastic when I think of these guys in Orange County. I do a whole baseball in Orange County. I wrote a book about it. I do a whole presentation about a game Babe Ruth played in Brea that I have the only known photos of. It's a really kind of fun talk. But anyhow, that's the backstory on those images. Now what this is a still I grabbed. This is that's the ocean to situate you, okay? PCH would be kind of here, and that car is driving up toward the gun club, okay? Over the dam, exactly. Now we're a reverse angle. It's driven through the gate. That's why, remember that post we saw out there? When I see posts, I kind of freak out because you don't know what it was connected to. That's the car. We stopped here to talk about, that's sort of where the sidewalk thing was, would have been right about here, and he's driving into the gun club. That's shot. Coming off, again, ocean out here, PCH, that's the Talbert Dam. That's the bridge you would have driven up to get to the gun club. Look at the cart. The thought of those automobiles in that spot, 1930, to me is just, it's so incredible. And that's the car pulling up to the gun club. I mean, look at that. I mean, it really, that gives you an idea. When you see that walkway, the sidewalk there, that would have run back down to where we stood and what you walked on today. That's what that is, right? I get goosebumps thinking about that. And that's the gun club. That's a shot of them speaking on the porch, you know, a scene that was shot there. And they had a little dock there where I said the boats would pull up, right kind of where the dam is. There's a little scene where a boat pulls up on the dock, right there. Again, PCH would be out here in the ocean, and that's right down from where we sat and talked today. Okay, who knows what this is? Any thoughts? 1933, Long Beach earthquake. Kind of hard to tell here. This is Coast Highway looking toward where we'd be like down here right now. Downtown would be behind this guy. They're looking at the damage after that quake. Unbelievable damage that Huntington Beach suffered as a result of that quake. There's looking, it's the road traveling up to the gun club. Look at the damage in the seam of the road. It looks like a fault line, okay? And again, we were talking up here, we walked up here, there's that sidewalk where the piece is still there, okay? But this is the photo to me. This is absolutely, there's so much story built into this. If you ever walk over that dam, I mean, again, there's the dam. And here are the surveyors out there looking at assessing damage of the road leading into the gun club. But look at the gun club. You know what I mean? Look at the structure. Look how rich the trees are. I mean, this is really spectacular. Looks to be like a flagpole here. We were sitting right up here, you know? And these guys are there, again, monitoring the damage. Look at that. That's that trail. That's that sidewalk right there. So when I walk there in the mornings, I just think of that, you know, and I picture how it looked up there, how you can place it up there in those trees, you know, and I just think it's so dramatic. Those guys were right here, you know, and you know, I've had this picture on my phone, the old one. I've been walking, I've stopped people in the morning, strangers. You gotta see this, look at it. Because I think it's so compelling. And when you see it, when you walk there again, you don't think of it the same way again. That's a big part of why I like to talk about this stuff, that you appreciate these spots. You'll drag, there's something you might have heard today, that you'll drag somebody up there and say, this, we don't know what it is, but look, it's connected to that gun club. So, okay, so this is, that's 1933, obviously, when the quake happens. The gun club at this point, gun clubs are falling out of favor at that point. The county is developing. All of a sudden, you can't just go buy 2,000 acres to shoot birds. You know, cities are starting to develop. So things begin to change, and the big change really is World War II happens, okay? And I didn't point these out. Do you know they're up there, though, right where we sat if you look over? These are the gun mounts. In World War II, for fear of a coastal attack, you know, after Pearl Harbor and all this, this became, as part of sort of an adjunct of Fort MacArthur in not Long Beach, but San Pedro. Up and down the coast, we had these kind of coastal batteries, and the Army came in and took over the Bolsa Chica Gun Club. They built 2 substantial bunkers, which some of you may have visited as kids or whatever. They're both sealed off now. Chuck says that one of them might have a minor opening. How many rooms were there? 18 underground rooms to store people and things and food and surplus. And they took, and ammo, of course, and these were where they mounted the 2 Panama gun mounts. They practiced a couple of times. You shared an anecdote on the trail that on one practice shot toward Long Beach, what happened?
The shell flew over Long Beach and they called an air raid. And people swore they saw the Japanese airplane.
Is that the movie 1941? that you're talking about? Okay.
People don't realize sort of the war history in Huntington Beach. On a side note, I worked to have a plaque placed at the corner of Newland and PCH last year where a P-38 in World War II crashed and killed, I think, 6 kids, you know, on a training mission. And again, the war touched this city in a number of ways. I think in a substantial way with this. That's a shot of what the practice shots would have looked like off the coast when they shot these things off. Now, when they take over the gun club, they build the bunkers. It's basically, again, an extension of Fort MacArthur, and they have to feed these guys. So directly down the path to the beach, there was a giant meat locker, okay, where they would cure meats, and they kept a lot of basically cold storage to feed the guys that were living at the gun club, the soldiers, okay? Do you know this place? That's the meat locker. When the war was over, what became Brewster's Ice was moved to downtown off of Main Street there. Family bought it, and when you go on there today, that's a piece of World War II history. That was the meat locker that contained the food that kept the guys fed at the Bolsa Chica Gun Club, which, again, is an amazing bit of history there. Getting close to the end here, I found these 2 photos when I was doing my first book on Huntington Beach, and I think they're stunning. It's a very weird, interesting time when these were taken. There's this one and another one a little bit tighter. The gun clubs shut down. This is the early 1960s, okay? Within a year or 2, there's gonna be a fire here, and the main part of the structure is gonna be destroyed. No one really knows how it happened or why it happened. There's a lot of talk about what might have led to that. But if you look here, I think it's incredible. You can see where the armaments were here, where we sat, like over here. Those palm trees, they're the same ones that are still there, you know? And the horse stables, there they are right there. And when you see all of this, when we see remnants on the ground, this gives you an idea why. Look, it took air ducts and plumbing and everything to power this place. That's what you still see popping out of the ground. And I just think this picture is amazing. It's before the trail was built, but the ground's been cleared. This is where Alpha Beta would have their cattle grazing in the 30s and 40s. But this is right near the end. This is the last gasp of Bolsa Chica Gun Club. And this next photo, I think, is even better. And there you really see. Okay, when we talked about what we thought might be a water pump, that's like right here. So there's a structure right next to it. could be a quarters for somebody who lived there, you know. But this really, again, these pictures to me, those two photos really kind of show you what it was like there right before the end. Again, that's the walkway. It's still there. Here's the armament. We sat right here on the bluff and had our conversation. This is it today. You know, that's, again, we were kind of an aerial shot there. That's the trail there, the gun club. Now, when I said I walked back there to write an article, the pad is still there. The concrete pad it was built upon, the foundational pad is still there. That's why I would love this opened up to the public. Just this part, when you think about the educational aspect of being able to walk back there with these kinds of images and tell the story in real time and real space, third graders here all do a Huntington Beach history project. This is where the project would be.
So who owns it?
It's privately owned. It's kind of murky. The gun club was ultimately owned by about 200 families, which made, when the oil companies came in, they said there was no bigger nightmare than having to negotiate 200 families to figure out what was fair, what was just. Everybody had to agree on it. So I'm going to find out. I think it's a consortium of different families, though.
Who got you to go over there?
I called Fish and Game and told them the piece I wanted to write. And it took a while. There was all kinds of red tape and stuff. But when we did it, there's a gate out there. That's the way in. They opened the gate, and in we went. And it was my son and I and the Fish and Game guy, and it was incredible. Again, another aerial shot. That's the pad where the gun club was, still fully intact. Okay? And that's the driveway. And those are the trees that are still there. And we walked over here. And that's that little, again, the water treatment thing, whatever, that's right there. So we walked this trail right here. And then a little bit closer, again, to give you an idea of just where the club sat. It sat there, then eventually went back here too. And you can see pieces of it. That's just brush. I went back there. The entire L foundation is still there today. And then we close with the kind of last pictures. So that's a little kind of trip back in time to experience how things were back there. If you want to see the clip from the movie, just to see the place like with movement and people. Okay, here we go. So there's the truck.
You want the sound on?
If it's on, it's okay. Again, it's really not about the sound. Okay, so wait, there's more on the road though. They're right about where that curb was, where we were, okay? When I was saying that the camera was, that's the, I mean, that's the Bolsa Chica Gun Club. Look at that. So he has this moment here with this guy. I showed you a still from this. And then we're going to see another angle of a car driving up. Shots like that I love because you can see brickwork. You can actually see physical detail of the building, you know, which does not exist photographically anyplace else. I know. That you say, look at the chairs. Look at all the detail, the clothing, the hat, everything, the shirt and tie on the kid. I don't think this is a long scene. Yeah. Okay, now. The sound matches the. But look at that. Isn't that something? I mean. But again, it's a regular feature production. If you look at the quality, the production value, it's. You haven't seen this, right?
No.
Isn't that something?
huge building, it's only half of it.
That's the thing. When you look at how deep it goes, and I mean, this goes on a little bit, but this gives you an idea of just what it would have been like to actually walk up to the place, just the physical properties of what it seemed like, and that this exists to me is just amazing. I mean, it makes me wonder, like, what else? I always think, what else is out there? You know what I mean? I was talking about that Teddy Roosevelt sign. I thought it said $25,000. I thought it was $25,000. And I looked it up, and in 1903, Yosemite was given $25,000 to build the first road through there. So I thought maybe they hung a banner that was celebrating that acquisition or something. Yeah. My son looks at it and says, no, it's not. He goes, it's 25. There's only 2 zeros, not one. It's $25. I said, I don't think so. So he takes, my son is a fine stamp collector, and he has these programs that can sort of hyper-analyze data in flat surfaces. So he takes the image, works it, a couple minutes later he comes out, he goes, I got it. And he had it. And what the sign said was $25 fine for running faster than a trot. On bridges back then, for safety, you would get a fine if your horse was faster than the people. You had to walk at the pace of a person, right? So that's the dock that was there. Again, coast highway up there, and that's where the boats would come up. I mean, so I go to Yosemite and I do the photo thing. I show them the thing, whatnot, and and people liked it. And afterwards, this guy comes up, and he's a park ranger guy. And I'm always so in awe of, like, any national park ranger, to me, that uniform. And he introduces himself. He says, I'm the park historian. Great. Come back to my office for a second. We go back in the office. He lifts the cloth up, and he has the sign. The actual sign was taken down in 1910, and it sits in his office, like this sign that's hanging behind Roosevelt. So I like when things like that happen. And anyhow, you can stop it. That gives you an idea of just sort of the look and feel of what it was like up there. So thank you for doing that, Abby. Take them.